Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have all of you. It's really exciting to kickstart this series of webinars together with our friends at Deloitte Private. It's something we've been talking about for a while, and I'm really just happy that we're finally kickstarting it. So today is the inaugural session. We'll be talking about succession planning today. Elaine will be talking about succession planning, and then we'll go into a panel where we hope to get your active participation. It's more fun for you and it's more fun for us if you do that. And I think you'll be able to get a lot more from our panelists that way. The next edition of this series will talk about asset protection. And the last one will be on Islamic elements within wealth management. So I think just as a quick intro, Labuan has been a wealth center for a while, although not as well recognized until 2010. So we've had trusts for a very long while. But in 2010, we introduced the Foundation Act that really has put us in the forefront of private wealth management, especially in Asia. As you know, Labuan is the only jurisdiction in Asia with a private, with a foundation for private client use. And since then, we've seen leaps and bounds in growth and the utilization of our structures. So as of 30th of June, we've got 350 foundations registered in Labuan, and we're really excited to see that growth. Obviously, what has happened with that interest in the foundations in Labuan is that we've seen other uses of other structures that are already in Labuan to add on and to complement the foundation. So that's quite interesting. I'm sure Eileen will be talking a little bit about more about that in her presentation to come. But I just need to do a couple of things, so bear with me. First and foremost, I need to thank Deloitte for agreeing to do this with us. It's really exciting, as I mentioned earlier. I'd like to thank Step Worldwide for supporting this, especially the chapters in Hong Kong and Singapore, for distributing information about this special session to all your members. We'd like to also thank all our supporters of Labuan, the marketing team at Deloitte and the team in Labuan IBFC towards the hosting of this. And we really hope that you'll enjoy your time with us and take away interesting ideas about how you may be able to use Labuan IBFC. Next, all it takes is for me to prompt Eileen that she will be up next. I think Eileen requires no introduction. So Eileen, please take it away, and I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Farah. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Today is an introductory session, and it's about wealth management and succession planning in challenging times. I think we can all agree it's very challenging times, but succession planning is such a huge topic. It's such a huge topic. I have 15 minutes. How do I do justice to this topic in 15 minutes? So, I mean, I teach wealth planning at the master's degree level at the Singapore Management University and Nanyang Technological University as adjunct professor. And I also teach advanced wealth planning certification programs for senior wealth planners, right? And private bankers and advisors. And that takes 4 full days alone. So what can I do in 15 minutes? Because there's so many, you know, tax and legal regulatory compliance concepts and so many different jurisdictions that are important to practitioners. And even 4 days is not enough to cover that. So anyway, I think in the short 15 minutes I have, I'll just share with you briefly what has kept me and our team at Deloitte Private intensely busy over the last like 2 years, especially since after I moved from Deloitte Singapore to Deloitte Malaysia, and I'm based in Penang now. Okay, so number one, what we have been very busy doing is helping business owning families create family constitutions. In particular, in the last 18 months alone, we've done 4 family constitutions. Many of them are from the top 20 or top 10 largest families in Malaysia with listed companies, and also for some smaller families in Indonesia. Number 2, we have been very purposefully crafting and inserting family governance into charters and articles of foundation, Laban foundations. As Farah said, the use of Laban foundations has really gone on an uptick, and that is very, very useful for holding families operating businesses, yeah, whether listed or privately family owned. Okay, and definitely when we do these charters, they're not your standard template, yeah, of foundation charters and articles. So personally, since the pandemic has started, I've seen a huge upsurge, yeah, in families doing succession planning. And I'm sure you have too as advisors. The pandemic has really brought home the reality of that, you know, death can strike at any time. And I think nothing centers the mind more than that when you see your family members or your friends or business associates or people in the community succumbing to it. So they become very serious about succession planning. So in challenging times like this, I think nothing describes our world more than disruption, okay? COVID has really disrupted it. The world was VUCA to start with, yeah? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's even hyper VUCA now, I would say, okay? So originally a health crisis prompted by COVID and a massive increase in deaths has also now created an economic crisis. Debts have exploded, right? With the lack of income at some levels, some family businesses have a cash flow problems, and that's creating disputes in the families on how to handle that. And so that moves to the disputes. If money is not a problem at a home or at a personal level, which is the case for most of our high net worth clients, of course, the lockdowns due to pandemics have still caused a social and mental health crisis, right? Families are stuck at home in lockdown. They're at close proximity. Their children are acting up. They, you know, there's so many things. There's uncertainties, there's fears. And so they're quarreling more, all right? And that creates a lot of tension. And even if cash flow is not a problem at the family business level, now we're talking about the business, okay? For the families that own businesses, the businesses themselves have so much stresses, like supply chain disruption, challenges in foreign workers, their health, dormitories, the factories are open, close, you know, and it just adds to the stress of business owners and managers. And founders realize, you know, this family, hey, I thought my family was harmonious before, but then they see that now they can't travel, they're all at home and they're quarreling. They're quarreling among each other about how to manage the business, how to pivot the business, how to deal with the pandemic. So it causes the founder to really think, what's going to happen when I'm not here anymore? Okay. And then they start thinking, I need to seriously do succession planning. The other thing is, with the closure of borders, yeah, due to the pandemic and no travel being allowed, more businesses are being restructured. And not only the businesses, but the wealth management and succession planning structures are being relooked. Why do I say that? We have, in Deloitte, we have seen some of our clients actually bringing structures back into Malaysia, back onshore, because some of the family members, you know, some of the families created structures offshore that required their family members to be based, resident offshore, all right? But with these travel restrictions, that is no longer sustainable because the family members cannot travel back regularly, you know, every couple of weeks they're back. They can't come back. They miss their family members, and so it's not a long-term solution. And so they are bringing the structures back. Then we also see people who are leaving, departing from countries because for fear of maybe the health situation in the country where the pandemic is uncontained, or they're missing their family members overseas, and because they're not able to travel. For 2 years, we've not been able to travel. So therefore, there are more departures, and therefore the need for more pre-immigration planning, right? Particularly if they're moving to higher tax jurisdictions from Malaysia. But so some of them are considering the use of PPLI when moving to Australia, or DVAs, deferred variable annuities, when moving temporarily to the US. Okay. Then the other thing we see is that some families, they're asset rich but cash poor. All right. They have a lot of assets tied up in their business, which is, their business may be doing well in the pandemic, not so well that they're having super dividends, but their business stock price is at an all-time high. So some of them see the opportunity to borrow, to create more cash by borrowing against their single family business stocks, and then using the loan proceeds to diversify their assets and invest in portfolios so that they get a head start in creating a family office in the future. All right. And lastly, we also see families with some of our families are really doing very well in the pandemic. So they have their businesses are generating super dividends, and therefore now's the time they're using it to set up family offices. And many of these families also consider using the Labuan Foundation as a family office. So you are all familiar with the Laban Foundation and the structure, so I'm not going to go through it, but just to highlight that, you know, if it is very, very helpful and useful for families who want a structure to hold, let's say, the founder's share in the family business to benefit the entire family across time. All right. And in terms of the tax issues, Pepe will talk a lot more about it, but just to say that, you know, a Labuan Foundation is tax exempt if it meets certain conditions, such as if it's a non-trading entity, it's a pure equity holding company, and it meets the economic substance requirements. Then, you know, it's just spending 20,000 ringgit in annual operating expenses. So that's taking care of the income tax requirements. It's tax exempt if it meets the requirements. Also, there is no RPGT if it meets certain requirements, right? All right, and no stamp duty also if it meets certain conditions. So, and even for families, we see who want to professionalize their business, their family businesses, meaning that the family members probably will just sit on the board of directors or just be the shareholders or beneficial owners through a Laban Foundation or trust. We find the families find this Laban Foundation to be a very useful tool. All right. Okay. So, but in terms of what we see is that Laban Foundations are very useful for and trust. Okay, for those who may not be using the foundations but trust, they take care of the succession of the ownership of the business or the assets, right? But at the end of the day, it's not just the succession of the ownership that's important, because the structure is like a shell, right? It's like a shell. What the soul and the heart of it is actually the management and decision making. That is what allows it to carry on a long-term basis and be sustainable over time. So management and decision making, the succession of that is critical. And that is an area that I would like to drive home that is constantly actually missing. So for those of you who are not familiar, perhaps just to show you that there have been examples of where structurally it's been very well done, put into a trust. It can use the same analogy to a foundation, the Low Family Trust, but because governance was not put in place to help the next generation make decisions, therefore they ended up quarreling substantially, yeah, after the patriarch passed away. You can read that. The case is still winding its way through the courts. It ended up having the widow, a 100-year-old widow, suing the trustees because, you know, she wanted certain things done and they were not, they did not comply. And the children, the 6 children, the 9 children were broke into 2 factions. This is a family, a $60 billion company, family that has been split into 2. Okay, and very, very sad. So just to show that at the end of the day, the need for family governance is there. Particularly if your clients are going to lock up their family business shares in a structure, then family disputes actually could be prolonged if there is no exit method or method to mitigate family disagreements through putting in conflict resolution mechanisms. Okay, so that's why a lot of our families have come to us to do family constitutions. And in case you're not aware of what it is, it's just a documented statement of what a family's core values are, the rules, policies, and procedures, all right, that family members agree up to align the expectations. I think the most important thing is to align expectations across generations. And then they can come together, the 2 generations can come together and co-create a succession plan the buy-in of the next generation is important. If you don't get buy-in and you just do a top-down approach, the compliance in the next generation is very questionable. All right. And we can also help them incorporate them into the foundation charter and articles. All right. So at the end of the day, for the Constitution, the most important thing that typically is addressed in the Laban Foundation when we put it into the charter and articles is the conflict resolution mechanism, the dividends, policies, the distribution of costs, and the decision making. Totally, absolutely key. What decisions require simple majority or special majority or consensus? Who decides what? Who is accountable for what? Who reports to who? How does information get disseminated? So that's the Foundation Council meetings or the officers meetings. And typically, we also help families create a family board or family council, which is similar to what a board of directors is to a company. And this is the forum that family members can come together to discuss and regularly surface issues. Without this, then family members don't get a chance to discuss. And when you don't have clear transparency and information flow, mistrust and suspicion tends to start growing. All right, we've seen many cases of this. I don't have time to go through some of the cases, but you need to have constant communication and to practice resolving disputes, especially when the founder is still around. So this is, in summary, this is what we have been helping families do, in particular, helping them to put up the family governance, the family constitution, which is like a code of conduct, this big umbrella governance that is overarching everything. And we also help the families with putting up the Laban Foundation and family offices, all right? And we incorporate these family governance into the structure, into the constitutional documents. So just to end and let you see that a recent survey of family businesses in Malaysia showed that 80% of family businesses say that their family business is their most important asset. Yeah, yet only 59% have some sort of governance, all right, versus 79% globally. And this is 59% of governance in the business, let alone governance for the family, all right? Then 88% of the next generation say they're involved in the family business. But are they heard? Do they have a say? Do they know what is the future going to be like? What is the succession going to be like? And 43%, okay, this is a very high percentage, feel that relevant information is not shared in a transparent or timely way. So that's why family governance is needed, the family board. To end, we just, why is an advisor needed? Because you just need an independent person to surface the issues, to address the elephants in the room, to help to mediate, yeah, and diffuse conflict. And I think very importantly, as advisors, we need to go the extra mile for the client. We have to remember the clients are families in the first place, and not just see them as big money bags, right? They need help in navigating this challenging environment. They need unbiased and objective views. Help them to help themselves. So if there's anything to take away, is one, ownership succession is not enough. We really need to do holistic risk management by helping them to do the succession of management and decision making, how to operationally manage their structures after generation one goes, how to help the family, protect the family against themselves in the future. And for clients who are very reluctant, help them think, what are the risks of doing nothing at all? Okay, there is so much risk if they do nothing at all, because transitions are too important to be left to chance. Thank you. With that, I hope that we can be better advisors to our clients and help them navigate their succession planning in these challenging times.
Thank you, Eileen. Sorry, thank you, Eileen. I was just looking at the difference of planning and the pain of planning and the pain of not doing anything at all. It's a bit like kicking the can down the road, right? So at this point, I'd like to invite Pepe, Executive Director, Deloitte Malaysia, to walk us through the tax implications via our panel, and Shuko Asha. Shuko represents one of the Labuan intermediaries, but more importantly, at this panel, he represents STEP Malaysia as well. So thank you everyone for joining us. It's a pleasure. So everyone with the COVID wants to plan. Everyone is looking at planning and how important it is to plan. So I guess it's clear that there has been an increase in the interest in planning. The question is, right, how is it different, right? So are there different, and this is a question for all of you, from your experience, from what you've seen over the last 18 months, we've all had to go through this. The drivers are there clearly, but is the ethos changing? Is the philosophy changing? Are they looking at different aspects of planning as opposed to just ensuring that their little nest egg continues to second gen, third gen? Anybody to go first?
Okay, I think the COVID pandemic that continues to hit us hard actually have raised the level of awareness and urgency to have proper legal planning in place, especially for new and young high net worth individuals, as well as those with young families. Okay, I think we have seen some surge in interest and inquiries on legacy planning structures. Now, since I think I took some information, based on Laban FSS statistics, so between 2019 and now, there are 98 new foundations set up. And for this year alone, up until July, 18 new foundations, 6 trusts registered this year. So it shows, this number shows actually, there is still interest for people to set up legacy structures, foundation for legacy planning. I think also we see an urgent need to review existing structures and documents. The pandemic caused an urgency for individuals to either create or update their existing wills. And in the case of Muslim person, I think there is also an urgency to update their wasiat.
I think just to add on to what Shuko has mentioned, I'm sure everyone would have experienced, everyone is in the lockdown, or there could be instances where your extended family are overseas, you couldn't come back, right? So with all these inconveniences, should anything happen to the family or even to the founder, right? You can imagine all the inconveniences, let alone doing a stock take of the full assets that he has. All right. I think that is one thing that is very, very important that we used to tell our clients that, not even during the pandemic, you need to take stock. What do you have? And most of them, they probably don't even realize, oh, I have this property. Oh, I have that over there. And these are things that are going to be very real. If someone leaves this world today, have we taken stock of the wealth that we have? All right, it can be very simple, but it raises a lot of awareness. Say, for example, for whatever reason, if I'm stranded in Australia, I couldn't communicate my structures, given that, I will never be able to come back to Malaysia. I'm stranded in Australia. What's the tax implication? Are there any concession given to me? They are, for your information. All right, in terms of people who travels, in terms of relaxation on permanent establishment, all right. And even if you look at the Inland Revenue website, there are some relaxation for people, who for whatever reason got stranded in Malaysia or stranded outside, couldn't come back. These are the things that everyone needs to be aware, because changing times require change of attitudes, lots of things.
Yeah, it's interesting how COVID seems to have slowed down our life, but fast forwarded everything else. Yes. It's bizarre. It really is. And Elaine, I wanted to ask you specifically, when you talk to your clients now and your partners here, is there a bigger focus on ESG? I mean, are people more socially aware when they're starting planning? Are they looking more at philanthropic issues to be put into the constitution to kind of like hard code it into that? That's one question.
So I think for me, the biggest difference is clearly the urgency. Yeah, the urgency. In the past, the urgency, and I think the broadening of scope and the understanding that they need to really consider their entire holdings, like Pepe said. In the past, they may have concerns about certain jurisdictions. It's quite siloed. Sometimes there's siloed thinking, like, okay, I need to do something for this, I need to do something for that. But then there's always that reluctance or delay, okay, that delay factor. But now there's no time. All right, there's no time. They just push it right through quickly, okay. Okay. Some things can be hastened, some things can't, but it's the urgency. If they're planning on departing, they just go now. You know, there's no more sitting and thinking. But before they go, they really need to do the planning, because once they land, it's too late to do the pre-immigration planning, right? But in terms of ESG, from the clients that I met, I think it really depends on the client. Right? Currently, right, the ones that we see, we've helped, you know, put in these number of family constitutions for very, very large families. By and large, a lot of them already have some sort of CSR, all right, either in their firm, their listed company, a very big yayasan, or some sort of very big CSR department, or their own charitable structure already. So it's just a question of incorporating some of those philosophies into the family constitution. I don't really see it coming into the forefront, because primarily the issue is really trying to get what was in the head of the founder down into paper, getting him to enunciate what his wishes are, his views are, what kind of legacy he wants, and the cross-generational discussion. That is the urgency. I see that urgency. Like, you know, we better not put it off because dad or mom may not be around tomorrow.
So there's urgency at a very
and we
basic
have
level.
had situations where the founder actually got very basic level, which is in a way good, because it centers the mind, right? But I don't think families should forget about ESG, that's for sure, because that is really important. It's another disruption. If you see my slide on the VUCA, I have climate change and geopolitical and all that. I mean, these things cannot, they are huge risks. They can't be left out. But currently, the basic risks have outweighed that for the time being. It's just like, you know, everyone's throwing away plastic, buying online. So there's so much plastic and paper and the PPEs, you know, just being thrown. All those work on reducing paper pollution and plastic pollution has really almost put us back 10 years, right? It's kind of sad.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, it's quite interesting. I want to ask you, because there's a question from Dr. Aziz here talking about family constitutions. And his question is, are family constitutions legally enforceable documents?
Okay, good question. I think this is a very common one. And I know there is a great deal of, so to answer your question in short, the ones that Deloitte generally does that we output is non-legally binding. All right, okay. That is the answer. And therefore, there is a lot of skepticism. Why bother doing it then? Why bother doing it if it's not legally binding? So then my next question would be, why do you want it to be legally binding? You want it to be legally binding because you want it to be enforceable in court, right? That is why you want it to be legally binding. You want it to be enforceable in court. You want the courts to enforce it. The point is, we say that if a family that goes to court has already lost, and we want to avoid the family even getting into the courts, ideally, because once you go to courts, you're washing your dirty laundry. Anyone can read all the statements of claim and all, you know, everything is out there, right? And all the judgments are out there. So we are trying to help the families resolve their issues before they get to court. And by putting in the governance that helps them, why is that? Because of a lot of unresolved communication issues, right? People don't communicate often enough, as the surveys said, 40% feel that there's not enough information. So basically, they need to communicate. And when we help them put in these constitutions, even though they're not legally binding, how do you make sure then the next generation will comply, right? Well, you don't need to have it legally binding. One is you get buy-in. You get them to be part of that succession plan so that it's co-created. You have buy-in when you have a say. There's moral suasion. Okay, yes, you say that. But what about third and fourth generation who are not involved? Well, if you have a legally binding document, you can't bind them anyway. If they're not of age and they're not a party to it, they're not bound, right? I just wanted to say that the punishment is incorporated into the family governance. So, you know, depending on the family, every family is different. there can be removal as beneficiary, disqualification as beneficiary, disqualification as a family board member, just, you know, just various ways to, according to what the family's values are and what they want, to try to rein in these supposed black sheep. Every family has them, right? But the main thing is the rules are there. It's very clear. If you do this, you're out. All right. So yeah. So does that help? I hope that answers your question.
In a way, having a family constitution, in a way, hopefully, does not allow for any legality issues to come in, right? Because everyone's on the same, so everyone's on the same page, as it were.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we have the conflict resolution mechanism built in as well. That's very important. We have the forum for discussion. We have conflict resolution, so mediation, arbitration, hopefully, so that you don't have to go to the courts. You have exit strategies, right? If it's not held in a foundation or trust, or even if it's a foundation, then how do you manage? Okay. That's very important to think and anticipate.
Yeah, actually, that answers a question from Hong Chia Tan, which is confidential arbitration for family disputes a good middle ground? Would that be, Absolutely. And it's completely available. I mean, it's up to the family to agree. So,
Absolutely.
So all this can be entrenched and it can be included in the agreement within family members, and everyone's onboarded. It allows for a clear platform for everyone to move forward in the family in the succession issue, I guess. So yeah, Pepe, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about tax, right? So there's no certainty in life but death and tax, apparently. And in tax now, there's no certainty at all because everything seems to be changing. What are your thoughts about a couple of things? First and foremost, there's the issue of the economic substance regulations, right? Not just in Labuan, but across the globe. There's also the issue of CRS and transparency. So how does this all come together for a family looking to structure their succession plan?
I think this is a very, very important question, and I think I shall address it in greater detail. I'm sure all of you are aware the rationale why there is an introduction of substance requirement to companies in Labuan, and all this has got to be taken back way back in 2019, and I'm sure most of you are aware there was a budget announcement back then by the Minister of Finance, and he says that there are going to be significant changes to the Labuan tax framework. Now, why is this changes important? Is because Malaysia is a member, and Malaysia has made its commitment as a member to the inclusive tax framework on base erosion profit shifting. Now, what is this? This is basically to say that, look, Malaysia is going to commit to eradicate tax evasion and harmful tax practices. So not only Labuan, as you notice, there are certain tax incentives which give a preferential tax rates. There are instances where these conditions the BEPS initiative. And what is happened here for Labuan is, and you're not only looking at Labuan, you're looking at all tax haven countries, even in BVI and even in Cayman, right? Moving forward, it is a requirement for those companies. As far as Labuan is concerned, those must be Labuan entities carrying on a Labuan business activity. All right, that is the first condition. And you've got to meet certain conditions. And what are these conditions? There are two conditions. You must have a minimum number of employees employed and based in Labuan, and you must have a minimum operating expenditure. So it depends on what criteria is the business activity. So what do you mean by business activity is that in the LOBATA, Labuan Business Activity Tax Act, it says that in Labuan, you can either tax as a Labuan trading activity, which is 3% of net profit, very simple, or you will not be subject to tax if it is a Labuan non-trading activity. I think as far as Labuan Foundation, which have been used as succession planning structures, is very important because more often than not, what is the purpose of incorporating a Labuan Foundation? You want to preserve your assets. You want to enhance the wealth of your assets. So more often than not, these are structures that are used to hold investments. You could be holding shares. You could be investment in stocks, securities, or even loans or deposits, right? So in substance, if it is a Labuan business entity, a Labuan entity carrying out an investment holding activities, then you've got to be very careful whether it is a Labuan Foundation that only holds shares. If it is only holds shares, then the substance requirement is that you don't need anybody to be in Labuan, but you must management and control requirement. Essentially, you basically fly down to Labuan to have the board meeting to prove that you have management and control, right? But at the same time, there could also be instances where the foundation not only holds shares, because you can imagine if you have only equity shares, the dividends that you get, you want to enhance them and you want to create more value. So you probably end up investing in securities, in deposits, you're going to widen your pool of investments. So the minute you do that, right, the substance requirement will increase from 0 to 1, meaning you need to have at least one individual to be employed in Labuan, and you can maintain 20,000 operating expenditure. So this is the difference. Now, the catch is that if the Labuan Foundation do not meet the substance requirement, there will be a 24% tax on the net profit. Now, net profit has a lot of dividend income. You better be careful because the net profit can be very huge compared to a situation where it is taxed under the Income Tax Act. Dividend income is tax exempt, right? So there is certain things that individuals has to be very, very careful about that. So in Labuan Foundation, it's not a question whether it's capital gains or whatever it is. You look at whether it is carrying out a Labuan business activity. If it is yes, do you meet the substance requirement? So that is the two key issues. Labuan Foundation is a very, very efficient and good structure. But if you look at even Labuan, the substance requirement, and you look into BVI or Cayman, they have similar substance requirement. And this is not something that Malaysian likes, to do and come up, oh, we need to do this. No, it is worldwide initiated by the OECD. Yeah. So there has been tremendous change on the worldwide tax, the framework.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the changes in taxation is something that we're all grappling with. Pepe, there's a specific question here from Eric. It talks about what is the status of the Labuan, where's that question? Okay, status of Labuan for charitable, what's the tax status for Labuan foundations for charitable foundations? And the other question is whether, what happens when the foundation is either pure or non-pure. So, I guess that's what you were alluding to in your answer, right? You have to be very careful in regards to the nature of the foundation, what the family wants to do with it, the kind of income you might be generating, or whether you're just a holding, a holding entity. So that's quite clear. But what happens about tax vis-a-vis, where's that question from Eric? Seems to have gone now. So that question about what is the status of tax for a charitable foundation?
I think charitable foundation, I think you got to be a bit careful because the context when you talk about Labuan Foundation, referring to the charitable foundation, you could very well be referring to the peninsular status where somebody decides to set up an approved foundation is very much for charitable purposes. Even for Labuan, you do have two types of foundation. One is a private foundation and one is a charitable foundation. But I think the context for us today is talking about Labuan private foundations, right?
Yes, correct.
So very much set up for the purposes of wealth management. But even within that Labuan Foundation, depending on what's the needs of the founder, he could put in the charter what is his philanthropic activities. But because it is a private foundation, he cannot solicit donations from the public, and that's the difference.
Correct, right? Correct. And one last question on tax before you go into another interesting question coming in. Can the Labuan Foundation opt for Malaysian ITA?
Oh, that's a good question. And it is also very technical. If you look at the LOBATA, right, the Labuan Business Activity Act opt to be taxed under the Income Tax Act. But if you look at the wording, it only complies to a Labuan company. Correct. All right. So it doesn't if you look at it technically, it doesn't apply to a foundation. It applies
Correct.
only to a company. All right.
Yeah, but a rose is a rose, right? So a lot of people are saying that, you know, a foundation acts like a company, you know, the family constitution is
Yeah.
almost like the aim of a company, as it were. So yeah, it's still questionable. Shuko, I've got a question from you, from Jamil here, specifically, does the Labuan Foundation need to be registered in Labuan? Which I think, yes.
Yes,
does it have to have an office in Labuan? Do you want to go through a little bit about the ESR requirements, specifically operationally on the ground?
Okay.
You know.
Sure. It depends on your business activity, actually. So if I think Pepe have mentioned this now, if a Laban Foundation, for example, holds non-pure equity, then you're going to need to have one full-time employee and also OPEX. So obviously, you probably need also office for your employee. So it all depends on the type of business activity that the Laban Foundation and also the type of investment, for example.
Just wanted to, if I may just add,
yes.
And please jump in, Pepe, if necessary, because this is more your area. But for families who have used the Laban Foundation to hold their Malaysian shares, family business shares, right, whether listed or private, if it's your equity holding and it meets, and it is, yeah, so it's a non-trading company. And they meet the definition of Labuan entity, meet the definition of Labuan business and business activity. They meet the ESR. The ESR is only 20,000 annual operating expenses, no FTE. So then they don't need an office. But of course, they still need to be registered. They need, you know, the Labuan, ideally a TCSP, Trust Service Corporate Services Provider, the secretary, etc., etc.
So yeah, absolutely. And it's 20,000 ringgit. 20,000 ringgit.
Yeah, only.
20,000 ringgit. That's one thing. The second thing is that in a way is the beauty of it, right? It depends on what you're using it for, and then correspondingly, your ESR will kick in. I wanted to go back to you actually, Eileen, because this is a very interesting question. Let me see, by Jessin Tam. Who will be the enforcer of removing the offended family member in a Labuan Foundation structure? So we're getting into disputes here.
Right.
Okay. So how do you, I guess, manage that?
Okay. So as foundations go, you know, it can be as flexible as they want, as long as it has been incorporated into the charter and articles, right? So if there is an offending family member that you want, that in the family constitution, there are punishment, right? So therefore, there's no point having a beautiful umbrella, the family constitution, that says, yes, I can do this, this, this to the family member, but then you do not mirror that and align your foundation or your trust to allow you to have that legal power to remove. So therefore, if there is such, all these punishments must also be similarly incorporated into the foundation. So therefore, the officers or the council members will have the power. We will put it in there to have the ability when they decide to remove. What are the criteria for disqualification? You know, or for being on part of being a beneficiary or being a part of the officers or the council members, the foundation council members.
It really,
how you draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where the family constitution is so important, right?
Yes.
Because it cascades down to the very core of the operating environment of that foundation.
Yes. So what I'm saying is, you have this beautiful family constitution, the big umbrella. Make sure you also align everything else, all your estate planning devices, your wills, your shareholders agreements, anything else, insurance policies possibly as well. They should all be aligned to the family constitution. There's no point having it in the family constitution, but then you don't put it in your trust or you don't put it in your foundation, and then you can't operationalize it. So then there's a disconnect. So to do it properly, you put it in there, and then it's however you drafted the foundation charter and articles. You can easily remove that offending family member. And that is legally binding.
Fantastic. And this is why I think the foundation's getting a lot of traction. It's because in a way, it creates clarity in a very nebulous family environment. Because what you're doing is, and it takes a long time based on what I've heard anyway, family constitutions can take anywhere from 6 months to a year to more for everyone to come together, agree to it, first gen, especially second gen as well, to come in and be completely onboarded with the vision. And as you say, what happens when something goes wrong, right? And that is where the rubber hits the road, as it were, when something really goes wrong, to really test that cohesiveness of the family, I guess. And the commitment towards the foundation, you know, and the whole planning. Shuko, I wanted to ask you, there's a question from Joyce here. Can a Labuan Foundation hold assets such as property or business shares where it's domiciled in Malaysia? I think a lot of people are very concerned about transferring of assets, be it liquid, not liquid, into a foundation or into a Labuan structure.
Yes, I mean, the Labuan Foundation, any Labuan entity, Labuan companies or Labuan Foundation, they are allowed to hold assets and shares of a Malaysia company, even assets in Malaysia. So as long as we get for example, if a Labuan Foundation, if you are going to endow a Malaysian property, it is allowed as long as we get the approval. There is a process that we need to do. A requirement to obtain prior approval from Labuan FSA for endowment of Malaysian property into Labuan Foundation. There is going to be a blanket approval or as when required. So in addition to this, approval from local authorities such as the State Land Office would also still be required, and all the relevant documents must be kept at the trust company.
I want to add on one more. Being a tax person, you must remember that any income coming out from the Malaysian property will still be subject to the Malaysian Income Tax Act. So there's no dispensation of that. So you can end up having to file a Malaysian returns to declare the Malaysian property income. At the same time, you file a Labuan return for the rest of it. All right. So take note, it doesn't give you any dispensation not to pay taxes because it's held by Labuan Foundation. So if they hold any Malaysian property, the rental income to tax the rental income. All right. Just one thing that I would like to raise awareness is that besides the substance requirement, you must also remember that there is this common reporting standards, right? As a result of the introduction of the automatic exchange of information. It's very, very crucial because I do have questions that people used to ask me, what is the common reporting standards look like in Labuan, if it is a Labuan Foundation or even a Labuan Trust or a normal trust, right? The question is that if you do have a Labuan Foundation or trust, common reporting standards will continue to apply if there is any requirement for the entity to declare the income to Malaysian Inland Revenue Board. Say, for example, if you have a Labuan Foundation and you happen to have a beneficiary that resides in Australia or in Singapore, for that matter. So what will happen here is that that information will then be, the financial institution will then look at that information to say that, okay, this is a bank account held by the Labuan Foundation, all right? And they will then have to do the reporting to the Australian Inland Revenue Board. The information will be sent by the bank institution in Labuan, for that matter, to the Malaysian Inland Revenue Board, and the information will be automatically exchanged with two tax authorities. Now, I wouldn't want to go any deeper into that because we are looking at common reporting standard. Firstly, the Labuan Foundation can be considered as a reportable financial institution, as though it is a bank, all right? And when it will be considered, it will be reportable financial institution is when you have trustees or you have people, professional people that manage the investments, like your fund managers, which are employed by a financial institution. So then the reportable obligation due diligence, right? But if it is a Labuan Foundation that it is internally managed, you don't have professionals and all those stuff, right? It will be considered as a passive non-financial entity, meaning they don't have to report, but the financial assets that they have with the banks will then be responsible to report. And the bank will see through, excuse me, they will open up the veil and to see through who are the beneficiaries, where are they residing. And this is where they will see through who is the controlling parties. Generally, the reportable person will be the settlor, the trustee, the beneficiary, effectively everybody. All right. If you ask me, it is something that you cannot avoid, but whoever wants to go into this structure must know that moving forward, there will be transparency. All right.
Well, there is already transparency, I think. I think in this day and age, transparency is what everyone wants.
Correct.
As a segue to the earlier question about transfer of properties, I'm going to take some of a question from Dato' Steve here. How difficult is it to get approval to endow company shares that are maybe property based in Asia? I think once you're talking about shares, there isn't a problem in transferring shares into a foundation. The issue is when you're dealing more with landed property and immovable property, then there has to be an understanding and acceptance of the legality of the foundation as an entity, right?
Actually, just to share with you, we've just gotten news a couple of minutes before I came into this session. We've got a case where the foundation was registered within a period of 2 weeks. That quick, that efficient. I mean, you're talking about just endowment of cash, with nothing there in first, just to set up.
Just to set up.
Yes, I think bravo to the authorities in Labuan. They've been getting very efficient to set up. It takes them 2 weeks.
It does, and there's also a fast track that you can apply for. But I think in certain instances, and I think Eileen will echo this as well. The bulk of the time that it does take is getting everybody on board with the same vision, and then the drafting. And then coming to the regulator, especially if it's just non-landed, very liquid assets to be inputted into the foundation, that shouldn't be much of a problem. There's also this question about, and I think this question has already been answered. I'm trying to gather all the questions here vis-a-vis tax. There's this holy grail question about inheritance tax ? So I think let's not necessarily go there. Maybe don't wish it. For Malaysians anyway. But the question is, income derived from Malaysian property received by the beneficiary, i.e. Laban Foundation, will be subject to ITA, right? So there's no arbitrage vis-a-vis taxation using a Laban Foundation. I mean, in that sense, that's very important to remember that Labuan is not here to be an arbitrage for Malaysians vis-a-vis the ITA. That's important. And I think Eileen will also echo this when I say that in a lot of instances, taxation is not the main driver for planning, right?
It's not the main driver, but it is a factor to be considered, right? To see whether it's efficient.
Well, you're not going to spend all that time and effort planning and just to pay more tax, obviously. Yeah. I mean, it goes against logic.
But how, in terms of the time it takes to get the full constitution or the fully loaded foundation charter, the way to deal with it is to incorporate first with a very basic foundation charter, and then over time, when all that fully fleshed out family governance is, we put in a new family charter. It's easy to do, very easy to do. But the important thing is to start the process. I think even if we really had a very near case scenario of a founder who was in the middle of a FEC process of putting in a family constitution, and he got COVID and it was quite severe and it was touch and go. But the thing is, even though it wasn't fully done, a lot of it was done. So at least the family, there a lot of the background was already done. Yeah,
but I think it's easier said than done. I think once you start, it's a little bit like unraveling a ball of yarn. Once you start, it's not so easy to say, okay, we just put it aside and then let's just go ahead with the setup and stuff like that, and we'll retweak it later. I think everyone wants it to be perfect from get-go, especially the founders, and it takes a lot of time. It is a labor of love, this business.
I may just add, the thing is, if they try to make everything absolutely perfect right from the beginning, they may never end. That's the thing. So there needs to be at least some measure of closure so that you can at least get it going. And if I may share an example of one family that has had a family constitution for 20 years already, and they have revised their family constitution 5 times. It's not revising the entire constitution. They revise parts of it because as they walk through it and live through it and discuss things and think through it, then they want to refine aspects. Or if they never had a family office, okay, let's put a section in to govern the family office now. Philanthropy, let's refine this bit. Family members working in the family business, we need to refine that. So it's a living document, right? That's the point. It will never guarantee that you have no disputes. No such thing. Even a husband and wife, supposed to be the closest, supposed to communicate with each other regularly, even husband and wife will quarrel. So let alone a family, let alone a family with multiple cousins living all around the world. It's inevitable. So you need to keep that communication, have a system in place. If not, guaranteed, the family is going to go to court. I mean, right? That's almost
eventually,
guaranteed.
regardless of how well it's drafted, right?
Almost
regardless.
Guarantee. If you have nothing in place, nothing at all, then you're almost guaranteeing that they will go to court, because they will, the lack of communication, the lack of rules, the lack of parameters will just cause this family dynamics. It's unfortunate, but it's true.
And that's why this is a labor of love. We don't have any time left, but there is a very important question that I want to address. It's from Go Lee, and the question is, one of the major fear of certain bosses is the stability of Labuan law, meaning they are fearful that the existing laws may be changed easily by the government. What is your view? I think of all the panelists, I'll be the one to take this question. And I think if this question is not answered, it will be like the elephant in the room. Now, okay, the Labuan law has been changed to refine it, not to undo it. I think that is something that everyone needs to understand. The commitment cannot be doubted, first and foremost. The fact that it's a law and not guidance. Labuan is not an incentive zone, okay? You've got 10 acts of law passed by the Malaysian Parliament in order to enact this cloud of laws that hang over this island of ours. I don't think there should be any question with regards to the commitment and whether the laws will change. Changing laws is very, very difficult. Now, I think what has happened, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, has been the impression, rightly or wrongly, is that the changes with regards to taxation has created this feel that Labuan laws are changing, okay? So I'd like to go back to what Pepe talked about earlier as well, right? These changes are not unique to Labuan in any way, shape, or form. And in every jurisdiction that we know of, there has been tweaking of these laws. Now, I put to you the opposite, right? I put to you, to everyone here, the opposite scenario, where the laws are not tweaked, i.e., if something doesn't work, we don't refine it. That would be harder to deal with than with changes that we hope and we believe after consultation will make the situation in Labuan vis-a-vis taxation more refined and clearer. So I think that's one of the things that I really wanted to put across, looking at Ms. or Mr. Goh's question here, is that it's important to understand that the tweaking will always be required. The tweaking is not necessarily unique to Labuan. All other jurisdictions in the face of the changes, specifically with regards to economic substance regulations, have had to tweak it. In fact, a lot of jurisdictions continue to tweak. Things like substance requirements vis-a-vis partnerships, for example, is something that is still evolving up to today. So it's important to not look at it as a storm in a teacup. It is a bigger piece that we're looking at, that's for sure. And just I put to you the scenario of, I guess going back to Eileen's earlier question, planning is difficult, but what's going to happen if you don't plan, right? So having laws and tweaking the laws is difficult. But what's going to happen if you don't tweak? right? So the tweaking is not vis-a-vis the laws and the structures and solutions that Labuan offers. It's very much to do with the changes in the international tax landscape that Pepe was talking about, right? So that's one thing. I've now taken 3 minutes to talk about that. But very quickly, to close out the panel, I wanted to very quickly ask everyone their thoughts about, moving forward with regards to wealth management, specifically in Asia. How do you feel about the key trends? So for example, we didn't even talk about multiple family office or single family offices or private trust companies, for example, and whether, there's this resurgence apparently of shareholders agreements with a family constitution, that kind of stuff. What are your thoughts, each and every one of you, please? Anyone can go first. I have no preference.
Okay, if I'll start. My view is that because we are going to still continue to see a huge intergenerational transfer of wealth, the area of succession planning is still going to be turbocharged. Yeah. And I think COVID and the pandemic has brought it home. I hope the reality, the risk, the realization of the risk that really faces families. It used to be, yeah, right? You tell them, yeah. But now I think it's really come home to roost. So I think that momentum will carry forward. Yeah, will carry forward. Of course, as advisors, we need to be sensitive. All right, I'm very cognizant of, there's some singer that was upset by some insurance agents using the death of some singer due to COVID. And then they put that into the insurance marketing material very shortly after she died, so that was deemed to be insensitive to the family, etc. Yes, I can imagine. So we need to be sensitive in how we broach it. But the important thing is that families understand. So I believe that this is, that there is, honestly, there should be a tsunami of need for succession planning. It's a question of finding the right people, convincing them, helping them to overcome their natural fear. Honestly, a lot of families are afraid of opening a Pandora's box, a can of worms, of rocking the boat. But honestly, if you don't do it, then how? It'll be worse. If you don't open the can and deal with the worms now while the founder is around, can you imagine when the founder is no longer around? The worms will come out flying and multiply, right? So so I think that is my view.
Thank you. Pepe or Shipal?
Okay, I think disasters often strike rather quickly and without warning. Whether it's weather emergency or natural disaster or personal crisis due to illness. And the COVID-19 pandemic is something that I will remember for the rest of my life and hope to never see or experience again. No one expects a devastating event and we can never really fully prepare for everything, but having a solid financial preparedness plan can play off in huge ways if disaster ever does strike. The key, I think, to financial emergency preparedness is proper planning. So I think that's where we come in. I mean, we and STEP, for example, STEP Malaysia and also our members here to help people to plan for the future.
Pepe, last but not least.
Yeah, I think just to wrap everything up, there's a saying that goes, with great wealth comes great responsibilities, right? And one thing that we must bear in mind that tax should not be the center stage of that entire structure. Or it is important, and based on my experience is that the client comes in to ask, what's the best structure? They know and then we got to tell the client and make them aware that setting up a structure itself does not help at all. When the constitution you put in, what's the rationale and what's the real reason of doing that? And then it goes back to, you got to sway them back to the fact that, hey, you need a proper governance because we are dealing with humans and you want to set up the proper value. And especially the second generation is that they yearn for respect of the founder, they yearn for communications, and it is honestly very fulfilling to see in some of the sessions that Elaine does, because it is not actually the structures that matters, it is helping them to see the expectation of everybody, because they're dealing with people. So when you look at the entire wealth planning and succession, I would say that it is not tax that is the most important, you know, it is not the accountant, but everybody plays an important part. And
so tax is not that important?
It is
communication,
important.
yes, communication is key.
Yes.
Managing expectations is paramount.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's very fulfilling to see that we are able to address all those questions, you know.
Yeah, a very senior private client lawyer told me once that this is a labor of love, this business. You know, it is really a labor of love, and you end up being counselor, psychiatrist, family mediator, you know, but it's so fulfilling. It's exceptionally fulfilling. But I'd like to thank everyone for staying with us, because we're 10 minutes over. I'd like to thank Deloitte Private, STEP Malaysia, STEP Singapore, Hong Kong, STEP Worldwide. There are few questions left unanswered, which we will get back to you personally after this, because all the questions have been written down. Thank you for staying with us. I hope you enjoyed the session. Come back and join us for the second one, where we will talk about not just wealth management done, asset preservation, asset protection. Now that is where the kicker is really, because it's one thing to put everything in a structure. What do you do with it? How do you make sure that it stays there, that it's there to be had for your second, third, fourth, fifth generation?